are bright and shiny in my mind. You got me loving, hating, crazy indecision in my mind.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast, where the focus is on deer hunting, tips, tricks, tactics, and stories from across the Midwest. And now, here is your host, Aaron Blasey.
Welcome to the Fall Podcast. I am your host, Aaron Blasey, and this is episode number 79, and it's part 2 of 3 with Chuck Weldon. So I'm going to keep this short and sweet and get to part 2 with Chuck here. Before I do want to get into that, I just want to remind everybody to head over to keeperbros.com to get the exclusive discount codes from all of our partners and all the products that we have. So if you haven't went over there already, head over there and also go on to the Fall Podcast Instagram and social channels, like them, subscribe them, please, and keep the feedback coming. It's awesome. I love the support, and I can't thank everybody enough. So with that being said, I'm going to kick this over to part 2 with Chuck Weldon, so hopefully everybody enjoys it. You know, and talking about trail cams, you know, you're talking about getting permission just on a piece of property just to go drop trail cams. I kind of want to segue a little bit into trail cams and uses of trail cams. So, you know, what a lot of people I don't think realize is, you know, you can break down the fall however you want. Pre-rut, rut, post-rut, or, you know, summer, October, November, however you want to break it down. But I feel like, in my opinion, there's a couple different ways to run trail cams and different ways to do it. You know, I want to know your tactics on it, starting with the summer. You know, when you're getting out there, let's say it's July or whenever you want to put cameras out. First of all, when do you put them out, and how do you run them in the summer? And then I want to transition to like October. How do you check them? How do you know, stay as less obtrusive as you can with scent and everything? Like, what's your formula for that?
Well, and this year's been an oddity because we were, and make it short, we were so wet in the spring, and we're still playing catch up now here in almost September. But you know, usually I'm putting cameras out as early as you know, mid-May. I don't run a camera year round. I mean, I've heard guys say I never pull them down. I want to know what's there. Once that buck drops his horns, unless he's got, you know, one leg shot off or a split in his ear or, you know, blind eye, you don't know what deer that is. It's just another deer. So right. I don't run cameras all year. Season's over with. You know, usually January 15th, I think, is when we end. I'll usually go start pulling cameras down, you know, 1st of February. But anyway, so in a normal year, you know, I start putting them out mid-May, into May, stuff like that. Again, we can supplemental feed here in Missouri, and I don't care if it's supplemental feed. Being a farmer, I've got a large access to just corn. So I'll go bucket up corn and go put, you know, corn out, whether it's in a feeder, a trough feeder, or on the ground. And I'll do that. We can feed up in Missouri. An area is considered baiting 10 days after the bait is removed or completely gone. So I will feed up until, and I can feed all year as long as I'm not, you know, hunting that farm, but I will typically feed up until the 1st of September. And then make sure that, you know, by law, everything's gone by the 5th of September, or I can't hunt that farm. And then as we, you know, now we're starting to get into that, we're getting close to that time frame. So you pull the cameras off of that, and then, you know, I'll start looking for scrapes. And some guys are really, really good about, you know, putting cameras even early season, or not early season, but, you know, in summertime, putting them on, you know, making mock scrapes. I personally haven't had the best success with that. I've had a little success with it, but I'll start looking for scrapes. And, you know, a scrape is just is just as effective as a corn pile is, or a feed, any feed pile. If you can find a scrape, I'm not saying that you're going to find every buck that's on the farm, but you're going to have a pretty dang good idea of what's there. So, I won't move my cameras a whole lot from then up until late season. Of course, I'll go put cameras on food plots and things of that nature. And then I'm a big advocate. One thing that aggravates me is somebody that gets off work at 4:00 in the afternoon and they got a camera on a food plot and they decide they're going to go pull a card at 5. I don't. Deer. You're going to bust deer about any time you go in and check a camera, no matter where it's at. You're going to bust something out. But I try to go real late morning or mid afternoon. Especially if I'm going to a food plot. I won't go check that. November, it's a lot of times. You get into the hunting months. A lot of times, if I know I've got whatever the farm may be, I know I've got a target buck there. I've got a win for this tree stand. If my access route takes me past that camera, I just pull that card in and check it when I get home. It's not one of those deals that I try to go in and intrude on a ton. But I never check anything. I never check anything early morning. I never check anything late afternoon. No, I shouldn't say never, depending on where it's at. We've got some big CRP farms like you talked about that I can run in on my Ranger, go to a scrape tree that's on the edge of the CRP, 3:00 in the afternoon, and probably not have to worry about blowing anything out. And a lot of times, right, wrong, or indifferent, we get into the rut, and I know this farm's got whatever Big Joe on it. I won't go check the camera. I'm just going to assume that deer is there, and I'm only going to go in once, and that's to climb in the tree. I'm not going to check it a ton of times, finding out well, did he walk by at 3:00 yesterday, or did he come by this morning? The camera's there for a reason, the tree's there for a reason, and that's because the deer's there. And I'm going to go in and grab the card either on the way to the tree or on the way out. And that's pretty much how I do it.
So, going back to the summer months, how much are you checking those cameras in the summer when you have them over, let's say, a bait or a mineral or, what have you? I mean, you're typically just using those cameras in the summer for inventory, correct? Right.
And embarrassingly this year, not near enough. But in a normal year, I got a feeder back here behind my house, which is what I call my primary farm. That's where I cut my teeth. Those deer are eating 200 pounds of feed about every 3 days. So I'm going in and I've had to actually change the settings on we're Reconics TV show. I've had to change the Reconics on or change the settings just to keep from filling up a card. I'm getting 10,000 pictures, every 3 days. So, usually once a week, as a general rule, once a week I'm going in and whether I'm, dumping it on the ground, putting it in a Banks feeder or whatever, it's about once a week is what I'm going in.
Okay. So, you guys open mid-September season, like around the 15th?
September 15th, yep.
So, you coming into the 15th of September, when are you transitioning your cameras to scrapes, and when are you starting to see scrapes open up, and not mock scrapes? I'm saying, when are you seeing ground scrapes that deer are making?
We'll start seeing them. We'll start seeing them late September, early October. Not near like that's one thing I absolutely love is being on some kind of, whether it's a track job or just a scouting mission in late October, early November, and even from like the combine, going around the edge of the field, seeing all the scrapes on the edge of a field. I've actually put stuff on my Facebook before that I've been disking bean fields or corn fields, and say you're a deer hunter when you're actually taking the disc and dodging around scrapes. So, that I actually get a lot of intel off of the combine. I mean, when you know you've got a shooter on a farm and you're running the combine around the edge of the field and every 30 yards is a scrape, it's pretty good indication that hey, maybe I need to put a camera up here. But we'll start seeing them. We'll start seeing them. Into September, into October, and then they're here in Missouri. They're few and far between. I love watching like Don Kiskey's stuff on Instagram with Whitetail Freaks, and he's got these signpost rubs that have been rubbed down to like a damn Louisville Slugger. And I do have a few of them around here, but not very many. But, I do know a couple trees that every year, man, there's, deer after deer after deer are rubbing these trees. So I'll transition some cameras to that and try to get on either a signpost rub or rub line in general. But pretty much after feeding's over with, I'm gonna transition from that to food and scrapes.
Okay, so you just have like probably one big transition mode from, a mass movement from mineral to food or scrapes, and then, when you get into season, are you, you're obviously going to get intel on a buck like you talked about, possibly getting intel from, the combine or something like that, but are you, let's take splits for example. You want to take 10 cameras and go on, you ask permission to go on the neighbors just to find out where the hell he was at. So now you're kind of adapting as well. So, once you make that first transition from, like you said, mineral in the summer to food and scrapes in the season, you're going to leave a lot of those cameras on food and scrapes, but then you're going to probably have a select few that you're just going to be kind of rover cameras. Is that kind of what you do?
Yeah, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm just this huge whitetail guru, because at the end of the day I'm a farmer first, and I've said for years that the hardest thing about being a deer hunter is being a farmer too, because deer season and harvest all fall at the same time. So, I don't do a bunch of bouncing cameras. Once we get into hunting season and harvest season, I mean, I'll try to take those cameras. September's a little bit slower because we're shelling corn, and a lot of that corn we're having to dry, so it's a slower process. So I'll go bounce some cameras around to get to some scrapes and things like that, and then I may not move 2 or 3 cameras the rest of the season, just for the simple fact that I don't have time. But I will, as we transition into November, if we'll just say the north end of the farm isn't paying off on this scrape, well, let's go put a camera on the south end on a scrape or a rub down there and see. And I guess I'm spoiled in a sense, just for the simple fact that the farms that I hunt, are farms that I grew up on for the most part, with the exception of this lease property, which makes it, hard. It makes it challenging, but makes it rewarding because I don't know them like the back of my hand. The other farms that I hunt, I know like the back of my hand, and the food plots are placed strategically, and I can, I don't have to overthink it, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
And I agree with you 100% there. And I guess you just kind of triggered a question in my head, and it's something I can almost promise you every deer hunter that runs at least one trail cam gets. And it's basically, how much merit do you put into intel on a camera? And I know it can vary. That's kind of a loaded question, because you could have splits coming by the same camera 3 days in a row at the same time. So then it's like, okay, you've got a little bit of a pattern. But let's say split shows up on a different part of the farm that you've never seen him on. And just for this speaking, let's say he's in daylight. and he's only in there one time. How much merit do you put into that intel right there than having somewhat of a pattern on him?
A lot, in a sense, because I had a deer that I killed a few years ago that we hunted forever. We called him the bow buck. Jason Bowers
I
took a
remember
shot
that deer.
at him.
I edited
Yeah,
the first when Jason, was it you or Jason that shot that deer with a muzzleloader?
Jason did, and nicked his belly,
Yep.
and so we the next year he was back, and I can't remember what we had in the form of encounters. But anyway, long story short, Bullens ended up drawing on him once. I got drawn on him a couple times, and the season that I ended up killing the deer, man, he just went ghostly. And I actually had a neighbor that called me, and this particular neighbor, and I know he'll never hear this, and so I'll rag on him a little bit. Every deer he sees is the biggest deer he's ever seen.
Yep.
But he called me, and he told me, he says, "Man, I drove by this farm, and he said, man, I saw the biggest damn deer I ever seen." And I said, "Really?" He said, "Oh my God, he was a monster." So I had and it was a farm that I could hunt, or that I did hunt, and it was a solid mile from where most of our pictures of this deer came from. It was probably half mile from where Bowers originally shot at him. But I had a standing cornfield, and I had cut down some corn there. So I went in and I didn't have a camera there. For some reason didn't have a camera there. And I went and threw the camera up, and I'll be damned. I went in, put it up like 8 o'clock that night, went back in like 8 o'clock the next night, and this freaking deer that I kind of haunted our dreams for the last 2 or 3 years is all over it. And I went in like 3 days later and killed him. So, I mean, I do put a lot of merit into it, but I say that cautiously because, is that camera on a food source? Is it on a scrape, or is it just on a trail? Because if it's just on a trail, he could be, that could be in the middle of his journey, and you could, you get one picture of him, and I've had this happen to me a lot, where you get a picture of a great buck and think, holy crap, and then that's the only damn picture you get, and he's simply just passing through. So in this instance, since it was on a food source, I mean, I put a lot of merit into it. That, hey, it's this because it was December, if I'm not mistaken. This deer's here. He's hungry. He's eating. I can kill him here. And ultimately, that's what happened.
Yeah, and I understand that was kind of a loaded question because there's a lot of scenarios that can happen, just like you said. Now, if that picture comes in, late October, and it's on a scrape, then that deer could be just checking a scrape for a hot doe. That might be the only picture you're gonna get of him. So, that it's kind of hard. You gotta. Once you get those pictures, you kind of have to weigh every option. Is it at dark? What time is it? Is it in daylight? What time is it in daylight? Is it the morning? Is it the afternoon? Like you said, late season on a food source. Yeah, I'd probably be going in there, no doubt, the next day and hunting, or the next time I can to hunt, because he's going to come in for food. Now, if it's the rut, like we just talked, or pre-rut, where, it could be on a scrape or a food source, he's literally just could be wandering a mile or two away from wherever you got him and just checking for a hot doe. And that might be the only time he comes through there, because that's his just, he got a scent, and he's just going. He has no sense of direction probably then.
I can give you a great example of what you're saying, and it's been several years ago, and I know every hunter in the world has done this. You've hung a stand, and you've said, and maybe you got no intel, or you a little bit of intel, but you hang this stand and you think, this is it. This is the spot. This is where it's going to happen. It was Veterans Day. Steve and I were still filming together all the time. I had the morning hunt. He had the evening hunt. He said, "Where do you want to go?" And the wind was right for this new stand that I hung. And I was so proud of it. It was comfortable, secluded, everything about it just felt good, and I did, at this particular stand, I did have a reason for putting it there based on travel. But anyway, and I can't even remember what I called the stand, but I said, we're going to go hunt that stand. So we went and hunted it, basically got skunked. I felt like an idiot, and it was that afternoon or the next afternoon or something. I went and pulled a camera on a stand that we called it the Boland's Bowers. When we did the Dream Season show with Drury's, we hung this stand specifically for those two guys coming to hunt late season, and I had a camera up there. I think I had 7 bucks from like 7:30 that morning to like 10 o'clock that morning. I had like 7 bucks over 150 that went through there.
Wow.
And yeah, it was absolutely
Was
incredible.
that camera on like a scrape or on just travel or what?
It was just on travel. There might have been a scrape, but obviously there was a hot doe there, and most of the bucks that came through I'd never even seen before, but we're in a river bottom type of country, where I say every year, you go, if you had the patience to go hang a stand on the Grand River, and sit there all day, every day from September 15th to January 15th, you could kill a giant every year because these deer just work up and down these rivers, and you never see them. We're kind of we're on a couple smaller tributaries off of the main river here, but same scenario. Large ag fields, plenty of cover, plenty of food, not reasons for them to move a whole lot other than love, and that's what it was that day. I mean, it was there was a hot doe that came through there, and it was just a buck parade. And that's one of those instances where, you probably need to go back and look at, the pictures prior to that, in fact, from summertime up until that day, and say, okay, I recognize 1 buck, but the other 6 I've never seen before. I'm probably not going to go, put the rest of my season in this stand, thinking that I'm going to kill one of these because they're not going to be there. One of them's going to win the girl, and then the rest of them are going to leave.
So, after you checked that camera and you got all those bucks on camera, what were you thinking? Was it like, I need to get in there the next possible opportunity because that doe could still be around? Or, what was your next move off of that camera intel? I mean, how much merit did you put into that?
Well, you got to rewind quite a ways to understand the fact that, we were still pretty green at that time. I mean, we were experienced hunters, but, goes back to what I said before about learning something from every hunt. And, at that time I was green enough that my mentality was, I need to get in this tree and I need to stay there. I need to set this thing all day, every day, for the next 45 days because I got all these big bucks in the area.
Right.
Which I can't remember now if that's what I did. I wasn't completely inexperienced at the time. But I was still cutting my teeth as, a bow hunter. So I think at that time, I probably put a lot of merit into it. Looking back on it now, I was an idiot, and I should have said, okay, these bucks didn't come from 100 miles away. Let's use the existing properties that I've got around here or that I've got access to, and I should have dive bombed them with cameras to figure out, where these deer are living. That's what I would do today. If the same scenario happened, I wouldn't abandon that area and think, the train came through and is not coming back again. I would still, I'd still put some merit in the fact that, okay, there's obviously a hot doe here because why else would, 6 or 7 bucks, of this quality be walking through here? She didn't just leave the area. So, I would probably stick it out for a little bit, maybe put some other cameras, if I had time or the right conditions, on some nearby food, and see if one of them's definitely going to stay. There's no doubt about that. One of them staying for sure. But I think the best thing to do at that opportunity is drop back and punt and analyze the situation and say, okay, where did these deer come from, and do I have an access to get back to where they call home and try to capitalize on them at home versus being a passerby here on my farm.
Yeah, and I've done that in the past as well, being more aggressive than passive. And I can almost bet that when you took that camera back home and started flipping through on the computer, you got wide-eyed and bushy-tailed because
I got pissed is what I got, because that was our second stand option, was either whatever I called the new stand and that stand, and that was our second option. And so I was angry, but yeah, I got excited.
Excited because I, like I just said, I've done it before too, and I think getting older now and getting a little more experienced in my hunting career, if you want to call it, it's more of like, now it's like take a step back, like you just said, and maybe go and look at an aerial again. I mean, you probably looked at this farm from an aerial perspective a million times, but then start diving in a little deeper of where are these deer coming from, like you said. Are the deer coming from left to right on the camera, right to left, right at the camera, right from behind the camera? Figure out what's going on, and then start figuring out from that area possibly, or just getting in, and it's the rut. You can bump, I feel like you can bump some deer in the rut and not really booger them too bad, in my opinion, because if a buck is on a doe, if you bump that doe, yeah, she might be gone a little bit, but she's probably going to come back through. And the thing is when the testosterone and the estrus gets running, I don't think those deer have a lot of perspective on what's going on. And they're just going to, that buck's going to take her where he wants her to go. It could be one oak tree in the middle of a CRP field that's 300 acres. He's going to take her there if he wants her there. So, you can kind of get away with a little bit more as long as you stay scent free too, and kind of take that approach as well. But being a little more passive than aggressive is probably the best move. And like you said, take a step back and then take that camera. Let's say that's your hub. That's your wagon wheel. Start taking some more cameras and getting them around the areas of that camera. See where these damn deer are coming in and out. And she's not going to be the only hot doe in the area probably either. If you're in the heart of the rut, you're going to get some more does more than likely that are going to be passing through this area, and there's going to be a lot of estrus in the air. And it might trigger one of those deer that you've never got a picture of, and you get this one picture of him now to come back through here. And there's just a lot of things you can do. And, I've learned that recently and within the last year or two to be a little more passive than aggressive and just taking a step back, really analyzing everything. But like you said, you were pretty green. Was Philly with you at this time? You said?
Yeah.
So you and Philly are probably like, shit, we got to get in there. First piss, like you said, that was your second option. But I mean, how many times have you picked a stand over another stand and then you got a shooter walk right underneath of it on camera that you checked a week later? It's like, so, being green into it, and it's hard to understand when you're green, and you can hear it all you want from guys on podcasts and on TV shows and whatever. But until you experience it, that's when you really learn it. I feel like you got to fail to succeed first, so it's like,
right.
But I totally get it, and to get, what'd you say, $6 or $7 or something that over 150.
I think it was $7 and estimated them all to be over 150. Yeah.
I mean, that's unbelievable. That's great. Yeah. That's great anywhere in the country,
Sure. Yeah.
So, and
yeah, it was
that just
incredible.
goes to say too, like, how much merit do you, like, back to the question that I asked you previously, like, how much merit do you put in the into these cameras and intel, and like I just said, and I think you might agree on this too, just really analyze everything. It could be time of day, it could be daylight, it could be, nighttime. Basically, if it's nighttime, depending on what time of year it is, that deer's probably coming from a farther distance away, and he probably doesn't live close. And if it's daytime, and it's in early October, I would think he's probably living pretty close to there, because usually in early October they're not getting too far from their bedding to feed, and stuff like that. And if you get a daylight picture of him, you're pretty damn close to him, I would think, where he's spending a majority of his time. I mean, do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, I agree.
So I just guess analyze everything you can, and really, when you think you should be aggressive, maybe take one step back for a second and think a little bit farther until you get aggressive. You might say, no, when you take that step back, you might say like, no, I'm getting aggressive. Okay, then go do it. Because sometimes you got to take risk, I believe, and like I said, and take a risk, and it might be like a risk reward kind of thing, like a high risk, high reward thing, or it might be high risk, really bad fail, but you're going to learn from it. So
right. Well, and that, backtrack a little bit to the episode we talked about earlier with Too Short. That particular day when I was going into that tree, I saw a doe, a small buck, and what I believe to be a shooter on the side of this hill, and they were far enough off and enough brush that I couldn't tell. After seeing splits in person, I would have known at the time that it wasn't him. But all I had was trail camera pictures and looking through some binos. But I actually had to stop and think. All right, he's not 150 yards from my tree stand. And I've already blown half a dozen deer off the field. What do I do here? And not knowing what deer it was, what the wind was, and the contour of the land, I said, I've got to take a chance. And it took me longer to get to the tree, but I got aggressive and worked my way around, somehow got up the tree. Ultimately, it was not the deer that I was after, but I successfully pulled it off. Had I known that wasn't, in fact, split standing on the side of that hill, then I probably would have took the more passive approach and said, well, I just blew a half a dozen deer off the field. There's a good deer standing over there, but it's not him. But when he blows the hell out of here, he may trip over splits when he leaves, and I'm just going to shoot it all to hell. And I'd probably went back to the house, So in that instance, I decided to be, not knowing everything, I decided to be more aggressive. Had I known it wasn't him, obviously I wouldn't have got the footage that I got, but I probably wouldn't have went to the tree. I probably just would have went home.
Well, and I guess this is a question I'm going to pose too, and this is something that I know personally. I work just like you. I mean, you're a farmer, but you're in the hunting industry as well. But I work every day watching hunting footage every day. I deal with one hunting scenario every day of my life. What whitetail hunting scenario, doesn't matter what it is. I am either thinking, editing, filming, producing something for whitetails every day of the year, and I have been for the last, since, for the last 7 years, hardcore, right. But, before that, I'm a hunter. But anyway, the question I'm kind of getting at is, as the hunting community, as hunters as a whole, how much do we overthink things? You know what I mean? And I had this discussion today with a guy at work, and it's like, I showed him a trail cam picture of a deer I'm getting right now, and the deer's got a small body, but he's got 135 inches of antler on his head. And it's like, we're trying to like put an age on this deer, and I'm like, honestly, I think this deer might be 2. And he's like, no, that deer's not 2, and he's like, he's at least 3. And the damn deer's not wearing a birth certificate, so we don't know, right. And it's like, we started getting into a conversation, not an argument or debate or nothing. It was a conversation of trying to figure out, like, there's this formula I feel like somebody started way back when that was like, this is what a deer looks like at this age. Right. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I'm saying, situational, it could be different. Like a Missouri 4-year-old could be a lot different than a Missouri or a Michigan 4-year-old. I'm sorry. So like a Michigan 4-year-old could be like the Jim Abbott deer I was chasing last year and shot. He was, he had a good side and he had a bad side. Like if you doubled his good side, he would have probably been maybe 120. But he was a 4-year-old. He was a Hereford of a deer.
Yep.
You put him in a cow pasture and painting black and white, you wouldn't know the difference.
Right.
If you take the antlers off him. And it's like, I just feel like we overanalyze a lot of things. And like you just said right there, you took the long way around to hopefully not bust splits, what could have been splits on the hillside.
Right.
Now you said, those deer that couldn't have been splits, and those deer could have ran through Splits' bedroom and got him up, and he was like, oh God, what's going on? A lot of deer with tails up, like I just need to run. It's a warning, I need to go. Now, there's a lot of things to analyze. Did the deer smell you? Did the deer see you? Is it just one of those things like, oh shit, every other deer's running, should I run too? It's like,
Right.
Who really knows, and I went down the age structure there for a second, but like who really knows what we're looking at, what we're doing? You know what I mean? I mean, I feel like we give these deer a lot of credit, too much credit in some instances, but they do have a will to live. We, like I say it all the time, when we go hunting, it's an away game for every hunter out there. Even though you might own the property and have hunted it for your whole life, those deer spend more time on that property than you do.
Right.
So you're at an away game every day. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, I guess the question to you is like, should hunters be more passive than aggressive? Or is it like, should you be more aggressive less? Like, let's say you only go aggressive twice a year twice a fall. I know that's a loaded question again, but I don't know. It's difficult. Every scenario is different, in every situation. So,
Well, I don't know how to answer that, and I want to talk to you as Chuck the whitetail hunter, and not Chuck the guy involved in a TV show, because in this industry today you have to be very careful about what you say, and it's kind of like NASCAR. You got to pimp your sponsors, and you may be too young enough to remember this, but hopefully there's an old timer here, or some kid will listen to this with his dad, and he'll understand. I remember the good old days when there wasn't trail cameras, and you went out and you climbed in a tree, and you heard a twig break, and a deer walked by, and you went, holy crap, that's a good deer, and I shot it. And you didn't sit up there and overanalyze everything. You didn't know that splits deer, that Jim Abbott deer, was on the farm, and this good buck walked by. The buck didn't have a name because guess what? You hadn't spent countless hours in the summertime, getting pictures of it and scouting it from afar and stuff like that. And I think in a sense. And I think I said this on the previous podcast. It's one thing that the television industry, I think, has kind of ruined the young hunter. That every 4-year-old that you pass will be 5 next year and be 180. I think we overanalyze everything too much. Now, as far as being passive and aggressive, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, regardless if you have a trail camera or not. I mean, there's still people today that they don't have the means to afford a camera, and they still go out and they're successful. But if you see a deer from the road and think, okay, I bet he's staying in that little clump of brush over there on the other side of that field. I want to kill that deer. Well, in that case, you get aggressive and you figure out how to go do it. But I don't know how you take that approach. When to be passive, when to be aggressive. I'm probably a more passive hunter than I am aggressive. If and it's where you're hunting too. I mean, if you've just spent $500 or whatever it is on an Iowa tag, and you got 5 days to be there, and you see a 170, on the piece of ground that you're hunting, or the outfitter you're on, or the public land, or whatever, and you see him go into a patch of woods and shit, I've only got 2 days left, and then I'm going to get aggressive. Where I hunt, I've got a lot more neighbors now than I used to. We've got a large horse and buggy Mennonite community here. Every one of them's got 10 kids. Most of them are boys, it seems like, and they all love to hunt. So my pressure is a lot higher now than what it has been in years past. Has that changed my tactics as far as being aggressive? Maybe a little bit, but it's also changed my mindset in where I hunt. If I've got a 4-year-old 160 behind the house, I still want to kill that net booner. If I've got a 4-year-old 160 behind the house and know that I probably should kill him, but I want to give him a chance, I'm just not going to hunt back there. We get down towards the end of season and hey, I need some content for a TV show. Maybe I better go back here and try something. Then maybe I'll get a little more aggressive. But I think the best way to answer that question, is where you're hunting and what your situation is, and everybody's situation is different. If you're a weekend warrior and that's the only time you got to hunt is Saturday morning and Sunday morning, then hey man, be as aggressive as you can be. If you've got an abundance of time, then I'd be more passive in the situation and make sure that you don't make a mistake and capitalize in the end, even if it takes a little bit longer to do so.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that because, the farm that I picked up that I call the main farm, a couple years ago, it's made me be a little more passive because of the lack of timber and the lack of good access. So it's like I went into it knowing I'd probably only be able to hunt it realistically 5 or 6 sits a year, good sits, and a majority of those sits might be from the pickup from the road glassing. That's an observation stand kind of thing. Now, right. I know you can't kill them from the pickup, but it's one of those things just trying to get a pattern on them. But, I've been a little more passive in that sense of and it paid off last year. I mean, I tried going in on all cold fronts that I was home for. And when I did that, I saw my number 1, 2, and 3 bucks in daylight hours, cruising. And one I got, 2 of them I got an opportunity at. One I screwed up on. Well, 2 I screwed up on actually, but the third one was just too far, and that really had a light bulb moment. And I agree with you in your situation. And I've actually drew my first Iowa tag this year. Now I'm a little different situation because my first number 1 priority is my job. I have to film and produce. Second is when I get the chance to hunt, I'm going to be able to go hunt. So I might only get 4 or 5 days in Iowa this year. My criteria that I'm going to go after is I want it to be a 4-year-old. I don't care score. I just want it to be a 4-year-old, and as long as I can do that, that's a successful year to me. If the first, if I shoot the first 4-year-old that comes by and he's 115 inches, I'm going to be super proud of that deer.
Sure.
Not saying I'm going to do that, but I also go by the standard as well. Is if I get excited over that deer and he's a 4-year-old, then yeah, I'm gonna try to put my tag around him.
Well, let's stop for just a second. Let's hope that there's a bunch of young hunters, up and coming hunters that are listening to this, and anybody that ever watches a whitetail fix knows that I get beat up every year because I say every deer on my farm's 2-year-old or 3-year-old or whatever. What you said right there, please don't. I'm a deer manager. I want to shoot mature deer and I want to shoot big deer, but we need to get less focused and fixated on age because, like you said, they don't wear a birth certificate. They don't. We don't truly. I don't care if you're Mark Drury, you're Don Kiske, you're Lee Lukoski, you're Chris and Casey Kiefer, unless you've got that deer in a pen and you've seen it, from the day of birth to the day of death, we don't truly know how old that deer is.
Not at all. Yep.
And the size of those antlers, I fixate on score. I really do. I mean, I'm guilty of that. But if there's a young, boy or girl, husband and wife that are new to hunting, whatever, don't let what you just said. If you get excited, then more power to you. Now, if you're hunting an outfitter that has some rules and regulations, hey, we paid $1,000 fine back when we filmed for Dury's, and shot an immature buck that didn't meet score criteria. But as long as you're not following some state or outfitter regulation, man, if you're happy to pull a string or pull a trigger on that deer and your heart gets beaten and you get excited, then by all means, I won't use the word that I want to use, but I'll just say the heck with the age and the heck with the score. If you're happy with it, then by all means do it.
Well, and that comes down to situation too, because, let's take you and I, for example. You're in Missouri, I'm in Michigan. My top 10% of my deer are 3.5-year-old bucks that are right around Pope and Young. You know what I mean? That's what I'm focusing on for Michigan. That's what I still get really excited for going after. Until that day is like, well, that 125-inch 3-year-old comes out and it's like, man, I just don't get really excited for it. Then that's when I'll change. But like back in the day when I started hunting, I mean, I shot 5 points, 6 points, little 40-inch deer. When I shot my first 100-inch deer in 2008, with my bow, I mean, I was tickled pink. You know what I mean? And then it kind of hit me. I'm like, okay, because I've had this discussion before, here in Michigan, at that time, 100-inch deer, you didn't see them. There was like a ghost. It was like, you were doing something if you shot something like that. And I did that in 2008, and I went back out in 2009 and shot another one. It was a little bigger. And I'm like, okay, this is awesome. So then it really started clicking that I was like, I didn't want to kill that little basket rack anymore. So it all goes in stages, and for some people it might not, but in my experience it goes in stages. I've seen it with my wife as well. She's killed some little bucks and now she's like graduated to like a little bigger deer and she doesn't want to kill the deer. She's never killed a deer that's been over 100 inches, and she passes them up now with her bow at 10 yards. And I'm like, what are you doing? You never shot a deer like that. And she goes, would you want the neighbor to shoot that deer? And I'm like, well, not really. And she goes, then why should I shoot it? And I'm like, okay, well, if it didn't make you excited, then don't shoot it. And she's
right.
Like,
well, and that's a tough thing in this hunting community that we've got is I've seen the arguments on Archery Talk and Facebook and
it gets
all
gruesome.
it does get gruesome. somebody post a grip and grin on Facebook and instantly the damn haters come out. Why'd you shoot that? Now don't get me wrong. You'll never see me shooting a fawn. I've seen people that do that, and they post their grip and grin with a fawn. You'll never see me do that, and I don't think that's right. That's not the type of hunter I am. But when it comes to an antlered deer, I don't care if it's a 6-year-old kid or a 60-year-old man. If they've got their hands on a damn forkhorn, I've watched Fred Eichler on TV, gripping a legal, forkhorn mule deer and just going nuts over it, And if you're that excited, then who gives a damn, how
Right.
old the deer is and
Yep.
how big the deer is, in that same sentence, I mean, if you come hunt my farm, I may have a couple off limits deer, because I'm a manager, I'm a little bit different, I may say, hey, if you see this one, respectfully request you don't shoot. Anything else, have your way with it. And not once. I've had Matt Bullins, I've had Jason Bowers, I've had these guys shoot, deer that I would never shoot. And not once have I condemned them for, or ridiculed them for, shooting a 130-inch deer. It's just they're happy.
But at that time, though, too, when they shot those deer, those were probably some of their upper echelon of deer that they've ever had a chance to take, though.
They're from they're from the state of Virginia.
Yeah.
I mean, they're hunting mountain deer. And I'm not picking on those guys. It's just, there's not a lot of people that hunt my ground. Then I got, Mike Marsteller that comes from Indiana. I mean, he's killed giant deer.
Yep.
Bigger deer than I've had the opportunities to hunt at. So when he comes here, I don't even, I just show him trail cam pictures of hey, here's what I think shooters, and I don't worry about what he's going to shoot, but in the same breath, if he goes out and shoots a deer and he's happy with it, then who cares? Really, who cares? It's not my place to judge what makes somebody else happy, and it's been a very unfortunate thing with social media and things of that nature that people get ridiculed for what makes them happy.
Well, and I kind of went through it last year too. Chris and Casey, they have an Ohio lease, and I went down there late season muzzleloader last year, and the only deer that we couldn't shoot showed up at 40 yards in front of me, of course. And he's a 145-inch 3-year-old. I mean, and the reason why we passed him up is because his dad, Chris hunted his dad the year before really hard, had a good encounter with him, or like low light, first thing in the morning, and couldn't shoot him at like 20 yards. Just didn't have enough light. And his dad was like a 175-inch 4-year-old, and he's literally, I'm not kidding you, Chuck, I mean, they are clones. Like, it's unbelievable. I've never seen two deer be the exact same thing. And we went down there, and I was hunting I had a late season muzzleloader tag. He shows up. I hunted the 2-day gun season down there, sat both days, all day in the blind, never came out. The last day, like last 20 minutes, he shows up at 40 yards, and I put the gun on him. Didn't know who he was at first. Put the gun on him, and I go, I can't shoot him. And Adam was filming me, and he's like, why not? And I said, that's Sneaky Junior. It's literally the only deer. That would have been my biggest deer by almost, 20 inches. And he's a 3-year-old, and I'm like, we watched him for 15 minutes. And it's like, dang it. You know what I mean? So it just goes, that criteria that, I wasn't pissed. I mean, yeah, a little bit I was, because I'm like, man, I'd really like to take that deer. Like, that deer made me excited. He's a 3-year-old and, mid-40s deer. But also it was like, I know what this deer can be as well. And at Michigan, I'd shoot him twice on Sunday. You know what I mean? Because that's a unicorn for us here. You know what I mean? So it's like just the scenarios like we've been talking and beating a dead horse by this time. But
the hardest thing about being a deer manager, you just said it, is coming up with names for deer. Because do you know how many juniors that I've had over the course of the last 5 or 6 years? Because I'll look at that deer and go, yep, that's an offspring of Little Buddy. Yep. That's an offspring of a Double B. That's an offspring of the Bow Buck. And you just want to name every one of them Junior. And I don't know how many juniors I've had to hunt over the years. So it's one of the toughest things.
It is, and this year I got a deer. I named him Sparky Henderson. I'm a big baseball fan, and the Detroit Tigers, I'm a big Tigers fan. Back in the day, one of their managers, his name was Sparky Anderson. He was he wore a number 11, and this deer's an 11 point, so I named him Sparky Anderson. So I'm starting to get a little deeper with my names and trying to figure out, things that I'm passionate about, sports and stuff like that, and icons that I grew up watching and stuff like that. Just kind of name them that, like Jim Abbott. He was a pitcher for the Yankees, and he went to the University of Michigan, and he was born without a hand on one arm. And
I know that story.
Yep. And the deer that I had, he had a weak one side, so I'm like, oh, it's fitting. No disrespect to the real Jim Abbott. It was just kind of like, in a way, it's kind of like, I'm I respect Jim Abbott as a baseball player so much that it was like, I want to name this deer after him. You know what I mean? So I was like, it's kind of
That's
cool.
That's one thing I've never been able to do is I've never been able to name a deer after a real life human, just for the simple fact that just doesn't seem right. Well, I just shot Patrick Mahomes. Now I've got a couple. Being a baseball fan like you are, I've got a couple Colt Bucks I'm going to name the Kansas City Royals, I think. So because they suck and never going to amount to anything anymore. So, but but anyway, being a closet Royals fan when they're good, and a terrible hater of them when they're as bad as they are now. So
Yeah, no, I mean, you guys had a couple good years there, so I'm going to give you that. The Tigers, the worst team in baseball right now, so I'm going to name every deer after a tiger.
There you go.
I'm just kidding. But no, I kind of learned that from Chris and Casey too, because they've got an uncanny ability to like name deer. Like we've had some of the best names for deer, I feel like, and it's either a movie theme or it's like a sports team or a sporting, a player's name or something. It's just, it's something that we lay in bed at night just trying to go to bed and we're talking about, well, we should name that deer, and it's like, we're trying to get all of his features. Like I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. The first year I filmed for Chris and Casey in 2012, we went down to Illinois. We were hunting the Grigsby. And Casey and I literally got into camp the first day, and he's like, what do you say we get on the Ranger and just go for a drive, and just kind of drive around. The first deer I saw, or, him and I saw on that lease, was a deer that had brow tines the size of like 10-inch brow tines. And he looks at me and he goes, you know what we're going to name that deer? I said, nope. He goes, Eugene. I go, really? Why? He goes, Eugene Levy. Because the guy on American Pie, the dad on American Pie, he's got the thick-ass brow tie, or, the eyebrows.
Yep.
He's like, that's his name, Eugene. And it was the first deer, and I'm like, okay,
that's awesome.
That's how serious we're going to get on this. So
that's awesome.
Yep, and every time it was Eugene. We saw him a lot that year, too. So
yeah, that's one thing. That's one thing that, you've got. We're sitting here talking hunting tactics and everything. You've got the best job in the world, working for, two of the greatest hunters in the industry. It's weird even calling it an industry, but it truly is. But, you've got, two of the greatest guys and smartest hunters in the industry to work and learn from. And I've been the same way. I mean, at drop of a phone call, I can call Don Kiske or call Mark Drury, and, Rod Owen, like I said earlier, he's forgotten more about deer hunting than I'll ever learn, and it just kind of makes us, feel spoiled a little bit.
It is. It really is. And I know if Chris and Casey listen to this, they're going to be really appreciative of that comment too, because I agree with you. I mean, those guys have taught me so much in the last 7 years, on top of just the scenarios that I've been put in with them. I'm there on Casey's hip every day in the fall. For the last 7 years, I've been there with him, and the different experiences that I've had with him, it just, experience, in any job. It doesn't matter if you're, I don't care if you're a newscaster or a weatherman. Well, weatherman, that might be thrown out because weatherman's wrong more than he is right. But it doesn't matter what job you're at. I mean, experience really plays a big role in what you're doing. And I don't claim to be an expert at anything I do, but I try to be efficient, and I try to be effective at what I'm doing, no matter what I'm doing. It could be basket weaving. I don't care. I'm going to try to learn everything about it I can, and do it the best of my ability. So,
well, and that's the beauty of hunting is, like I said before. I mean, the more experience you got, the better you're going to get, and podcasts like yours, we can learn from one another. Somebody's going to listen to this and say, well, they're a bunch of rambling idiots and don't know shit about what they're talking about, and another guy's going to listen to it and say, well, yeah, I remember that hunt I went on that this happened, and I had a really good night, and man, maybe I do need to remember that. And we that is the nice thing about the hunting industry too, is we're a pretty tight knit little group.
Yep.
It can be a cutthroat group when it comes to the sponsorships and as far as the TV industry and all that, but hunters in general are a pretty tight knit little group, and I think we strive to make each other better.
And there you have it, part 2 of 3 with Chuck. And I know it was a little long-winded there at times. I got on a rant and get talking and it gets flowing, and it kind of started turning into a BS session. But it was good conversation. Hopefully everybody took a little bit or even just a fraction of something out of it. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And like I said, part 3 of 3 is coming up here soon. So thank you, everybody, for listening. Thanks for the support. Go to iTunes and subscribe to the podcast, please. And if you could, leave a 5-star rating. Thank you very much, and thanks for listening.